It's always different this time, right? That's always
in the run-up. People always think it's not going to happen to us, the arrogance, the ignorance, and it's never different.
Right. So you say that tongue firmly placed in cheek. I want to ask you, this time when we see Treasury Secretary Geithner answer some questions before the House Oversight Committee today on that bailout of AIG, I want to ask you, from your viewpoint, should AIG have been bailed out in the way it was, and the counterparty is receiving 100 cents on the dollar?
Well, of course they shouldn't have received 100 cents on the dollar. Of course we should have negotiated something. But on the other hand, this whole thing smacks a bit of a witch hunt. The big problem was they didn't regulate AIG. That wasn't the Fed's fault. That wasn't the Treasury's fault. They came in on the eve of destruction. People thought the financial system was melting down. And I think it has to be put in that context. This really feels like a witch hunt to me, whether you agree with Tim Geithner, whether you did the right thing. I mean, clearly to suddenly place all the blame on him or on Ben Bernanke, it's absurd.
Well, the idea, though, of not having bailed out AIG, the term catastrophic is often used to describe what would have happened had this not occurred. Would it have been catastrophic? I mean, where would we be rebuilding from at this point had we not seen that bailout?
I mean, the bailout would have had to start somewhere. It was a question of where you draw the line. And yes, they bailed out the banks. Yes, they bailed out the big investment banks. They knew that. They didn't want the whole system to collapse. Look, I wish there were haircuts. I have been quite critical in many ways. But the idea that you can save the system and not save the big players, it's nuts. They were trying to save the big players. It was a backdoor bailout. It was an end around Congress. Congress would not have helped.
Interestingly, at a lunch today with George Soros, he was talking about his take on the global economic and financial situation. And he said that it was a mistake to allow Lehman to go bust, and it broke the system. That decision was what broke the system, he thought. And it caused us to move to this form of artificial life support, leaning on the government there. So in some ways, how much...
I couldn't disagree more with
You couldn't
that.
disagree?
No, I disagree.
Why?
I mean, look, the system was going... We were in for a tough time. We had all the signs of a deep financial crisis. If it hadn't been Lehman, they had to draw the line somewhere. Now, true, if we had come out with bailing out all the banks without letting Lehman go under, we could have had it different. How could we do that? How could we give $500 billion, $1 trillion to the banking system or to the housing market? It wasn't politically possible. We needed blood. After they bailed out Lehman, they still would have had to bail out Merrill. They would have had to bail out Citi. It was a long line. Maybe not that week. It would have happened. They had to draw a line in the sand.
So is the global financial system broken right now?
Well, it certainly is. I mean, so we're in this situation where people at Davos are saying, have the banks learned anything? Yeah, they have. Then, especially the people who lend to them. They learned they will get bailed out. They've learned that their debt is like the government's debt. That's not a place we can be. So there needs to be a rebuilding, a re-regulation. I would have liked to seen them less generously treated so we don't have to regulate so much now. But I don't know what else to do.
Well, when you look at the conversation that's happening in Washington right now, in the terms of that new regulation, that new financial system, is putting constraints on the size of a financial institution, is capping pay, is separating out, commercial banking from proprietary trading. Are those the right tracks to rebuild or build an entirely new financial system?
I mean, some yes, some no. I think the pay is very populist. The too big to fail, that's a joke. I mean, you only have the big banks fail when there's a systemic crisis where the whole economy is affected. So if you break up, say, Citibank into 10 smaller banks, they're all going to fail at once anyway, and you're going to bail them out. I think we need to do more about the shrinking the assets, the trading book.
There needs to be about shrinking the assets.
Well, I mean the leverage,
reducing
in the system,
putting constraints on the amount of risk,
especially short-term borrowing in the system. I mean, it's really if you look at the history of financial crises, what's the unifying theme? A lot of excess short-term borrowing, and all of a sudden confidence is lost, and everything collapses. And they need to have more safeguards. President Obama suggested something, but I don't quite know what he's going to do. It's kind of fuzzy.
Right. Well, that is the response I get from a lot of people saying, well, we got to see what actually makes it through Congress. But in theory, I've had hedge fund managers, I've had a number of big financial names, George Soros himself, come out and say, Volcker rule, they're for it. They think it's a good thing.
Well, I liked seeing Paul Volcker in the background of the president.
Yeah.
It had big symbolism. We're going to have change. And, certainly the idea the president was proposing radical change is something I support. But on the other hand, just focusing it all on the trading book is going too far. To the extent the banks are playing any sort of middleman role, they'll have to take some risk on their books. But I support Paul Volcker, certainly.
So what kind of global regulation coordination there are we really seeing? We saw the press conferences. We saw the move from G7, G8 to the G20. We've heard that it's going to happen, but it doesn't seem, when you pick up your newspaper and you have Obama making very public comments about his take on regulation, you hear different noises out of the UK. It doesn't seem that there is that much communication about the right way forward.
Well, you said it, Margaret. I mean, I think a lot of people here in Davos, we have a lot of Europeans especially, are quite shaken by Obama's comments, because even if they support what he's saying, they say, wait, we've been having these discussions, we've been having these negotiations. This isn't what we're talking about. You come out with something completely different. We don't agree. We don't think this hits the nail on the head.
You're sensing anger from some of the regulators here that you've spoken with?
Yeah, I mean, confusion, unhappiness. I mean, they don't want to go in this direction. They actually do want to shrink the trading, but much more put the capital requirements on parallel with what it is in other parts of the bank's balance sheet. They would say he's sort of hitting on one aspect and almost overkill and not treating the whole thing.
So what do you think is driving that? Is it, as has been speculated, sort of balancing with what's popular or unpopular on Main Street with what's best for Wall Street? I mean, is a certain amount of politics being injected here?
I fear so. I mean, I think the election in Massachusetts really threw the administration for a loop. They have a superb technocratic team, Summers, Geithner, and of course Ben Bernanke.
Is he going to stay in that position?
I hope so. I mean, that's really shooting yourself in the foot not to reappoint Bernanke, but we'll see. But they seem to have just been shoved out, and the politicos come in and taken over and calling the shots. I hope not, because I admired President Obama for his team, but I don't want the politicos running the economy.
Right, and monetary policy is supposed to be, devoid of political influence. But yes, of course, you do have the Fed considering employment, so there is somewhat of a sense of what Main Street's feeling that is flavoring what we're hearing from them. Today at 2 Eastern, we're going to get the latest read on the economy. What do we need to be listening in for here? What's most key?
Well, look, I mean, the Fed's not about to start raising interest rates anytime soon, no matter what their read is on the economy. And I think that's the message that they're going to send. They're feeling under a lot of pressure, obviously, politically, their independence, the future of regulation. They feel like they're being unfairly blamed for a lot of things. I mean, that said, they did take on a lot of fiscal activity, and it does require some discussion.